For centuries seen as a symbol of true love, the ever-popular turtle dove is in trouble. We have lost a staggering 95% of our population since 1970, and if the current rate of decline continues, it could be extinct by 2020. It's a similar story for the tiny twite, a songbird with a population in England that has fallen by more than 90% over the last 20 years. CEMEX's Doveholes quarry in Derbyshire is one of the last bastions for a bird that now has only 100 breeding pairs across the country. But if CEMEX and the RSPB have their way, Doveholes will also become a launchpad for a better future for the twite. The rock here has the cracks and fissures needed for safe nesting. What it then requires is an abundant supply of seed to feed its young. An area of bare ground has been sown with coltsfoot, which provides an abundant supply of seed early in the season. By June and July, the twite relies on seed from traditional hay meadows, which are themselves in decline. The solution here has been to sow a 5-hectare area within the quarry with plants like common sorrel, sheep sorrel and autumn hawkbit.
And hopefully with this we will be able to see this population build and grow, and because at the moment it's precariously small. We've only got probably about 5 pairs in this area, and the next nearest ones 30-40 miles to the north, so it's a really isolated population that we really need to look after.
Meanwhile, in more central areas of England, CEMEX and the RSPB are similarly using sand and gravel quarries to provide a much-needed uplift for the turtle dove. It too is mainly a seed eater, but the special seed mix for the weeds it loves are best grown on tilled ground, which has been made available at 4 sites. CEMEX sites are also able to help with tall hedgerows for nesting and a ready supply of water.
As we hope, and we're quietly confident, the turtle doves will feed on these areas that we've specially created for them, and then hopefully we'll be able to roll that out to all the CEMEX quarries and even others in the industry as well. You know, we can be the leaders to teach other people how to help this bird that is rapidly becoming endangered.
Aggregate Industries has added a large group of new workers to its team at Greystone Quarry in Cornwall, a colony of bees. The hives that now sit alongside the quarry near Launceston are the workforce's own very individual contribution to the company's wider biodiversity effort. It came about as a result of the distribution of honey from another colony nearby and a discussion about the alarming decline in honeybees over the recent years. Recognising that their site has plenty of suitable land, they not just established hives but used a restored tip to establish species-rich neutral grassland as a source of pollen and nectar. They have also sown nectar-rich wildflower seeds and translocated wild primroses from a new working area. Quarry manager Anthony Allday has added head beekeeper to his weekly responsibilities and has attended courses to enable him to look after the bees. The time commitment is, he says, not a big one.
This time of year, between late spring through to late summer, depending on the weather, they need inspecting once per week. Probably time-wise, it's around an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours for both the hives, so fairly minimal.
Now well established, the colony has generated some £30 of honey in its first season. It's being harvested and processed by a local community interest company. Some will be shared amongst the workforce and some sold for charity. Anthony hopes other quarries will follow their lead.
I think my advice would be definitely look into it. It's quite easy. It can be quite daunting initially, but if you go on a course, it's surprisingly easy to pick up. There's plenty of support as well from local beekeeping associations, but it does, although the time commitment's not large, it does need a regular commitment of time to make it a success.
Question: how do you protect a colony of bats when you want to restore the building they're living in? Answer: well, with a bit of imagination and a lot of enthusiasm, you create temporary lodgings and meanwhile get builders to incorporate a 5-star bat hotel in the original building. Tarmac faced the challenge when it sought permission to restore a 17th century listed farmhouse at its Halecombe quarry in Somerset. The roof void contained a colony of lesser horseshoe bats, with sporadic visits from greater horseshoe bats and brown long-eared bats. The necessary development licence from Natural England resulted in this alternative bat house for the horseshoe bats. It has its own roosting area and a nursery box in the eaves. The bats were also given a hand with directions through the creation of an earth bank as a sheltered commuting route to the temporary accommodation. Native trees and shrubs were planted on the bank to provide food along the way. Meanwhile, builders set about restoring the farmhouse, including a bat loft with an access gable and internal landing hopper. The project had its challenges for Vaughan Gray and his colleagues at Halecombe.
Very difficult indeed. They very often like to come back to where they were. We had one particular weekend when one window blew out, and the next day there was bats back in the farmhouse, and the builders had to go through all the way again to get them moved out. Oh, it's been very successful. Last year we had the bats loft cleaned out, and there's certainly a lot of evidence of breeding and bats thriving up in the little loft space. Well, certainly what we've learned is that these rare breeds has got to be protected, and you've got to go into it wholeheartedly. You've got to put the plantation and the vegetation that you see around, that's got to be right to encourage the bees and moths and butterflies. That's all what the bats live on, and it's very important that we keep our species for future generations.
The Halecombe team is not, however, yet fully satisfied that its bat hotel quite hits 5-star standards.
We're going to put a heater up into the roof space to encourage the bats to stay here in the winter months and to breed here. And obviously what we want to do, and we're hopeful, is we're going to make this a reasonably sized colony for the bats of all descriptions.
Hanson faced quite a problem at its Repton quarry in Derbyshire when the closure of older coal-fired power stations meant that the supply of pulverised fuel ash to be used for fill dried up. With agriculture as the previously approved end use, the quarrying process had left a series of deep and regularly shaped cells awaiting PFA. A major rethink was needed, and a new scheme was developed to create a range of wetland habitats, which also reflected new priorities of the planning authority. The man who was given the task of the redesign and its implementation was landscape architect David Southgate.
The landscape had to change drastically from that square rectangular nature and had to be redesigned into a more naturalised landform that suited a wildlife area, and so that was a complete about turn in the design, and we had to rethink everything right down to the details of where all the overburdens went now that were originally to cover the farmland, and they were used in making the shallows and the batters to the lakes, and so there was a whole load of details that had to be redesigned for the site.
The success of the rethink is clear to see, with an intricate mosaic of habitats from meadows through to wet woodland, and from reed beds through to an open water and reinstated brook. The ecological diversity in a relatively small site is massive and contributes to the landscape scale enhancement of the biodiversity of the Trent Valley. With the landforming work done, the Derbyshire's Wildlife Trust took on the further development and management of the reserve. The success to date can be gauged from the fact that it has achieved its first target of persuading bittern to overwinter here. Declining species like lapwing and redshank are now breeding in the wet grassland, and little ringed plover are happy in the gravel areas. There are now also large populations of reedbed species like chetties, warbler, reed warbler and sedge warbler. The reserve is very accessible and highly popular with local walkers and bird watchers.
If you imagine this site previously, it was an operational quarry with very little bird interest. It was interesting for birds, but they were often just dropping in and then going out again because it's on a flyway, the Trent Valley flyway, so birds are naturally drawn to these wetlands, but the habitat just wasn't quite right for them. So restoring the site to nature conservation and creating habitats like lowland wet grassland and reed bed and open waters and islands have all made a massive difference to the birds, because they can now come along, drop down and rest and feed up before they move on. And of course the net effect of that is if you've got some birds feeling confident and safe on a site, then they'll stay and breed or they'll stay for the winter.
Even for a site that has planted more than 50,000 new trees, The felling of 2 very old ones is not taken lightly at Tarmac Scorton Quarry in North Yorkshire. The necessity to remove the 350-year-old oaks was recognised in the site's planning permission. But what the Scorton team did not accept was that the veteran trees could no longer have a value to biodiversity once they were felled. The idea they came up with was to reposition them, but retain the main stems of the trees as monoliths. And they then enhanced their potential further through the use of a chainsaw to cut tears, cavities and slots to make them attractive to bats in particular, but also to other birds, fungi and to a variety of beetles, bugs and other invertebrates that live on dead wood.
We were aware that monoliths have been created elsewhere on dead trees in situ. So it was a bit of an initiative to think, could we actually move these and create some monoliths? So having looked at it, we thought it was viable and we thought we'd give it a go. So we looked at them habitat-wise, what they could be used for, logistically how we could do it, and then came up with a plan to do it really, and using our own resources on site. Excavator on site that we had, we used a face excavator, helped us move them, and the expertise of some local contractors to actually take the limbs down piece by piece and get us to move them where we moved them to.
After digging around the roots and establishing a ball, the operatives prepared suitable holes. Even with the main limbs removed, the trees each weighed around 10 tonnes, so it was no easy feat to shift them and then make them secure. Meanwhile, the wood from the branches was also kept and spread around the parkland site to further boost the overall habitat benefit. While bats haven't colonised the monoliths just yet, there are already plenty of other species that are colonising them.